Okay, the NBA draft lottery was tonight. Just finished up, and we now have our official draft order for the 2021 NBA draft, and there are certainly some surprises in here. This was a lottery that we were paying a lot of attention to for a couple different reasons. Everybody wants to know where Cade Cunningham is going to go. We now know the answer to that. We also wanted to know what was going to happen with a handful of different teams in terms of protections on certain picks, who was or was not going to keep their pick, and we now have all those answers, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So let's talk about it. Okay, so the three things that I was really paying a lot of attention to coming into this draft, outside of the obvious, which was where's Cade Cunningham going to go, were the protections on a handful of different picks. One being the Orlando Magic potentially getting Chicago's pick if it did not land in the top four tonight. The other was Minnesota potentially giving away their pick if it did not land in the top three, and then that pick being conveyed to Golden State, giving Golden State 2 first-round picks within the top 14, of this class. And then the last one was Houston potentially going into a pick swap situation if their pick landed outside of the top four, and it was a very, very unique situation because it was a top four protected pick swap, meaning that if Houston's pick landed outside of the top four, they would have fallen all the way down to number 18, which is where Miami is supposed to be selecting, and Oklahoma City would have gotten their pick at whatever it would have been outside of the top four. And we now know the answers to those questions. You can see the order next to me here, and Orlando is going to get Chicago's pick this year, the 8th pick in the draft, and they have another pick potentially coming in 2023, making that an even more costly trade now for Chicago with the Nikola Vucevic trade. They traded away guys like Wendell Carter Jr., in addition to now whoever gets selected at the 8th overall pick, and then whatever they give up in 2023, which is also top four protected. I was excited about the possibility of Chicago moving up in this draft, potentially getting someone like Cade Cunningham or just getting into the top four to add to this group. But now they go into next year with essentially the same roster. Vucevic is a very, very good player, but this certainly increases the price of that initial trade here for Chicago and helps Orlando as well. They end up with a little bit of bad luck here as their pick. They had equal odds with Houston as well as Detroit to get the first pick in the draft. They end up at 5, but they end up with 5 as well as 8. So the possibility there for them to move up if they'd like to, or just to get 2 really good contributing players in this class. The interesting thing about this class specifically is there's a pretty hard line between the top 5, maybe you can stretch it to 6, and the rest of the class within the lottery. So that line of like getting number 5 or getting number 6 potentially is a huge, huge deal in this particular draft when it comes to the talent level. And so, Chicago giving up the 8th pick in this draft isn't necessarily the end of the world when it comes to the Vucevic trade, but of course they would have rather kept their pick this year. The next part was something we've been watching for 2 years, and that is this mystery Minnesota pick that Golden State ended up with as a result of the D'Angelo Russell trade. Minnesota is going to give this pick up, but it's only going to be the 7th pick in this draft. Again, outside of that upper echelon of prospects that most people have as a consensus at the top of this class. So Golden State ends up with the 14th pick in this draft and now the 7th, which they got as a result of that D'Angelo Russell trade a handful of years ago. An interesting development there for Golden State because for the longest time, people were looking at that as a really nice trade piece, and it would potentially go unprotected next year if it was protected this year. Minnesota looks like an up-and-coming team. They played well towards the second half of the season, and yes, it's unfortunate that they have to give up this pick, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, possibly giving up as high as the 4th pick in this draft. And then the last one was Houston. They went through the James Harden trade, all these different variables of their season, but tonight they probably had more on the line than any other team in the entire league. If their pick landed outside of the top 4, there was a 48% chance of that, they would have ended up going all the way down to pick number 18. There's a bit of a complicated pick swap situation between them, Oklahoma City, and Miami. But essentially what it boiled down to is if their pick landed anywhere within the top 4, Houston kept their pick. It ends up at number 2. They get the 2nd overall pick in this draft. If it had landed at number 5, which again, there was a 48% chance that would have happened, Oklahoma City would get their pick. Houston swaps all the way down to Miami at 18, and Miami would not have gotten a pick. The way it worked out was Oklahoma City ends up at 6. They slide down 2 spots, and they get that 18th pick, which was Miami's. They end up at 6 at 18. When going into the night, there was a possibility they could end up at 1 and 5. So a lot of interesting scenarios here, but now we're going to get to the top of this order and how it's going to potentially impact these teams. The first pick in the draft, Detroit, they're going to get Cade Cunningham. I'm going to be honest, this was not one of the teams that I was rooting to get Cade, but congrats to Detroit and to their fans. They're going to get a fantastic player, someone that is really going to elevate this franchise and and accelerate some things, quite frankly, for them, where they need to start putting a good roster together around this guy so that they can develop him properly. Congrats to them. It gets more interesting at the second overall pick, where Houston, by most consensuses that I've seen, is going to end up with Evan Mobley. How that impacts their roster remains to be seen. But Houston is not without not only assets when it comes to the Brooklyn picks, whatever you think those are worth, as well as players on this roster. Eric Gordon, John Wall, Christian Wood. They've got some pieces here. And it's going to be interesting to see how much they prioritize the development of someone like Evan Mobley, or potentially playing players to try and win more basketball games. Something to keep an eye on there in Houston. And then at number 3 is where it gets very, very interesting. There was a moment in time where I thought that Cleveland might end up with the first pick in this draft again. As it worked out, though, they end up moving up to number 2. And it, again, presumably there's an option here for them to potentially end up with a talented guard with this third pick being Jalen Green or Jalen Suggs. And that's really going to call into question how much they value the 2 guards that they already have, that they've already drafted highly in the past, being Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. There have been rumors about them potentially moving on from Colin Sexton. The thing is, though, it's rare that you see a player on a rookie contract that is successful from a statistical standpoint being traded by their initial team. For the very obvious reason that if this guy's a good player, why would Cleveland be in such a hurry to trade him away to another team? And if you're another team, you're questioning why you would want Colin Sexton if the team that has had him for a couple of years, and again, statistically, he's been productive, doesn't want him. Certainly brings up some question marks there in Cleveland. I would not be surprised if there are some rumors floating around about the possibility of Cleveland moving down in this draft so that they do not select a guard, potentially getting some assets from another team that maybe really likes Jalen Green, maybe really likes Jalen Suggs, or maybe they just pick a front court player, someone that fits a little bit better with what they're looking for, or they select one of the guards and they try and figure it out, or we could be looking at a scenario in which someone that, more than likely in my mind, Colin Sexton, ends up getting traded there in Cleveland, something to keep an eye on. And number 4 is a team that I was hoping would move up, and it's the Toronto Raptors. Getting the 4th pick in this draft is certainly impactful for them, as this is a franchise and a team and a roster that is certainly in a little bit of a transition here, right? They win the title in 2019. This year was obviously a strange season playing in Tampa. They had a lot of injury and protocol issues, but there's talent obviously on the team. You've got Van Fleet, you've got OG Anunoby, you've got Pascal Siakam. All those guys, though, are making a good amount of money, and then you're looking at potentially bringing back a 34, 35-year-old Kyle Lowry who's a free agent. I wouldn't be surprised to see them explore sign-and-trade possibilities, because it looks like now they'll move forward with a group that includes OG, Van Vliet, and Siakam, and whoever they get with the 4th pick in this draft. Do they get a talented backcourt player? Do they get someone that helps them on the wing or in the front court? I'm not sure, but what I do know is that Toronto has been one of the best, if not the best, player development programs in the entire league over the last couple of seasons. They're one of the best run organizations in the entire league as well, and that makes them unique amongst some of the top teams that are going to be picking in this draft. Toronto, from a player development standpoint, has the best reputation out of any team in the top 4, and if I'm a prospect, I'm hoping to go there in terms of my development as an NBA player at the next level. So lots of things to kind of take from this lottery here, and not the least of which is how the top 4 ended up working out. It's unfortunate for teams like Orlando and Oklahoma City that moved down multiple spots. I was hoping for a scenario in which Oklahoma City ended up with like 1 and 5 or something. That would have been a really cool situation to see, them just continue to add to this incredible amount of draft picks that they do have. But ending up at 6 and 18 is certainly not the end of the world for Oklahoma City. They would have rather been higher, and Houston certainly is taking a deep breath this evening knowing that they did keep their selection within the top 4. Not as much crazy upward movement in this lottery as we've gotten used to over the last couple of years. There is no New Orleans and Memphis moving up to 1 and 2 to get Zion and Ja Morant. There is no the Lakers jumping into the top 4 that instigates then an increased trade package for Anthony Davis. There hasn't been anything like that in this particular lottery, but we now have a very clear and full picture of what's going to be happening moving forward with this draft. And again, presumably we're going to go Cunningham, Mobley, potentially a guard at 3 with Cleveland, and kind of up in the air there at number 4 for Toronto. It's going to be a weird draft evaluation process because of the strangeness of the last 1.5 years of prospect basketball, whether that be at the college or international level. And I think we know some things, but we know less at this point in the draft process about each of these prospects than we typically would. And we'll have to kind of wait and see on how each of these teams value and evaluate each of these individual players. So congrats to Detroit for getting the first pick in the draft. Congrats to Cleveland and Toronto for moving up in this draft, and for Houston keeping their pick as well. We've got a couple of teams that have multiple picks. Orlando ending up with, what do I have here, 5 and 8, so 2 picks within the top 8. Oklahoma City with 6 and 18, and Golden State with 7 and 14. A Golden State team that, of course, everybody is keeping an eye on as a possible trade destination for any number of interesting trade targets that could come up. This was a really, really impactful night in the NBA, and we'll look back at this and say, what if this, what if that? I'm interested to see kind of how it shakes out now over the next couple of weeks and years, of course. Thank you guys to everybody that hung out during the draft watch party stream, the lottery watch party stream tonight. It was a ton of fun. Thank you guys, anybody that donated, hung out, any of that good stuff. Just know I appreciate it. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your night. That is going to be the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like rating on it. Check out the boxes on screen as well for more videos from me. And yeah, I'll see y'all next time.